First, thanks so much for joining us for today's event. We'd like to warmly welcome our members, representatives from Indigenous peoples groups, farmers organizations, the media, and other partners. I'm Paul Winters, Associate Vice President of Strategy and Knowledge here at IFAD. I'd like to offer a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Swiss Ambassador to the UN in Rome, His Excellency Pio Wennubst. Also nice to see our panelist, Margarita Astralaga, IFAD's Director of Environment, Climate, Gender, and Social Inclusion. Sarah Mbago Bunu, IFAD's Regional Director for East and Southern Africa. Joining us all the way from the Philippines, Esther Penunia, Executive Director of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. And Rosana Palastri, joining us from Peru, IFAD's Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. Today's event, Farmers on the Front Line, Building Resilience in a Post-Coronavirus World, is not your usual UN-style event. We're not protocol heavy in this virtual world we find ourselves in. In fact, we intend this first three events to be pragmatic, informative, catch up on what is being done on the ground. That is, we are linking you here in the virtual world to the reality of the world's poorest as they face up to this health crisis. And just before we get started, some quick virtual world house rules for our panelists. Please keep your microphones muted unless speaking, and please raise your virtual blue hand if you need to speak. For those following us on the webcast, please send your questions via Twitter using hashtag IFADPostCovid-19, telling us your name and organization. And remember, we are time limited, so we will need to keep things tight. Thanks for taking that all in. Now down to business. COVID-19 is already having adverse impacts on rural people who are particularly vulnerable in terms of the spread of the virus itself and the knock-on economic effects. IFAD is addressing the immediate impacts, preventing the erosion of results from past and ongoing operations, and putting in place the building blocks to support post-COVID recovery. By supporting rural people's production and marketing activities, insurance crisis resilient support services are available. We enable them to maintain their business and livelihoods during and after the crisis. This will build rural people's resilience to the effects of the crisis, prevent them backsliding into poverty, and protect the positive impacts previously achieved in IFAD projects. As part of this, a couple weeks ago, our new Goodwill ambassadors, Idris and Sabrina Elba, announced that IFAD has committed $40 million and launched an urgent appeal for additional funds to support farmers in rural communities to continue growing and selling food. The COVID-19 Rural Poor Stimulus Facility will reduce the effects of the pandemic on food production, market access, and rural employment. As part of the broader UN's response, the facility will ensure that farmers in the most vulnerable countries have timely access to inputs, information, and liquidity. On top of its own contribution, IFAD aims to raise at least $200 million more from member states, foundations, and the private sector. Now, today's event is a chance for us to catch up with what we're doing and hear from you as well about what you want us to be focusing on. But first, I'd like to offer a very warm welcome to His Excellency Pio Wennubst, Switzerland's Ambassador to the UN in Rome. Ambassador Wennubst is an agricultural economist, an experienced development diplomat with extensive field work in areas that include migration, climate change, food systems, rural development, and support to multilateral institutions. Working in both the private and public sector, the ambassador has worked in Nepal, Madagascar, and Tanzania. From 2010, he was in charge of reforming the Swiss Development Agency's global program on food security. He later joined the Swiss permanent mission to the UN in New York as head of the Economic and Social Development team. Subsequently, the ambassador managed the Global Cooperation Department as Assistant Director General of the Swiss Development Agency and was in charge of Swiss support to multilateral funds and programs. Currently, the ambassador is representing Switzerland to the multilateral agencies here in Rome. Thanks for joining us today and making the opening address. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Paul. I'm sorry with the introduction of my person. You already took my 5 minutes, I think, so I will try to be very short. So, hi to everyone, and I hope you will enjoy this hour together. So in the title it goes, we're talking about the post-coronavirus world. So here is my introductory remark. The post-coronavirus world will accelerate a process that is already ongoing. In a highly urbanized world where people will cook less and less by themselves, where families are getting fragmented and smaller, where direct access to orchards and their own production of fruits, vegetables for consumption will be reduced. And more importantly, where determinants of health, including social ones, will play an even bigger role than today. And we saw it now we are seeing with the coronavirus. Sustainable food systems capable to respond to individualized needs will be a key feature. So the coronavirus is not only, and of course here is mostly, but it's not only about food security crisis or resilience of more smallholders in danger. There is something very, very big at stake. Of course, this is already big at stake, but what is also big at stake is that we need to rethink the food chains from production to consumption. And this is where the real front line of farmers and smallholder farmers. I'm Swiss. We have plenty of smallholder farmers that actually are intertwined with the social fabric of our nation and our society. And suddenly, when we thought that their role was fading away in the modern time, with this virus is coming up stronger and stronger. It's about societies, it's about social elements of societies. And farmers and smallholder farmers, or family farmers, as we like to say in Switzerland, are the fabric of this social structure, and this will have to be in the future. So this is the front line, is yes about resilience for the farmers themselves, but it's also about their contribution in a new world where food systems are more sustainable. And I will end with this to allow more time for the experts, panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Pio. That's a very interesting remarks on how it accelerates issues and that we have to rethink the food chain and not just think about how we're going to build resilience, but what the fundamental role of family farmers are in society. So very interesting. Let me remind you that those who are following the webcast to send your questions via Twitter using the hashtag IFAD post-COVID-19 and tell us your name and organization. Now let's move to the panelists. First, we have Margarita Astralaga. As I mentioned, she's IFAD's Director for Environment, Climate, Gender, and Social Inclusion, to tell us how things are going. Margarita, please.
Thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. As Paul mentioned earlier, in addition to the massive loss of life, COVID-19 has destroyed as well the livelihoods of millions of people, posing unprecedented challenges to our food systems. Sorry, my computer is blocked. Ouch. Hey. That's what happens with this. Okay, so now that's fine. Yeah, thank you. It's causing these big challenges to our food systems and development efforts in the process. So crisis of this nature requires us to come together to protect the most vulnerable people among us. Our beneficiaries need our support now more than ever. And also the nexus between people, health, wildlife, livestock, ecosystems, and economics is now very clear, and the need to manage food systems in an integrated and sustainable manner has never been more urgent, as the Swiss ambassador just mentioned. Efforts to curtail the spread of coronavirus are having a profound impact on our food systems, because maintaining a social distance has resulted in the closure of key outlets along the food security, the food supply chain, including restaurants and the food service industry. Additionally, many countries have shut borders and implemented internal travel restrictions. Such policies have resulted in disruptions to supply chains, including the arrival of seasonal workers and the movement of commodities to markets, which 80% of consumers in low-income countries rely on to obtain income and food. Perhaps most worrying of all are protectionist policies that could lead to food insecurity, as they did during the 2008 food crisis. Some key producers have already stockpiling and implementing export quotas on a range of commodities, potentially raising food prices elsewhere. So some of the wider potential impacts on food systems that we have seen is the closure of SMEs, disrupted agricultural exports and imports, unemployment and poverty, crippling public debt, labor restrictions, consumer demand shifts, and potential civil unrest. So staple crops, as we can see in this slide, are largely remaining stable, thanks in part to healthy stocks and forecasts of favorable climatic conditions. But despite this present stability, it is predicted that COVID-19 crisis will push a further 130 million people into acute food insecurity. So also, as you have seen in the news, from the climate and environment perspective, drops in greenhouse gas emissions could reach 8%, while nitrogen dioxide pollution levels fell by 37% in China alone. But these benefits are symptomatic of economic slowdown, and they are likely to be short-lived unless stimulus packages are tied to the adoption of green technologies and more sustainable development practices. The nutritional outcomes are also directly affected by COVID-19. More than 350 million children across the world may have lost access to regular school feeding as a result of school closures. And according to the World Food Programme, well over 40 million people across West Africa may face acute food shortages in the coming months, with many developing world countries facing a very similar challenge. And then youth are likely to be disproportionately affected by job losses. Initial projections suggested that we would have 27.4 million people that will lose their jobs because of the crisis. However, as you probably heard in the news yesterday, already the US has 33.3 million unemployed due to the crisis. So what this is showing is that the crisis is going to be much more severe from the economic perspective than we thought initially. And also, as many of as 500 million people could slide back into poverty, setting our efforts to achieve SDG 1 back by 30 years. So IFAD understands that COVID-19 is not unfolding in a vacuum. It is evolving in tandem with pre-existing issues, including environmental degradation, climate change, and social inequality. So for this reason is that we are continue to push and strengthen our ability to build resilience, because this is the cornerstone of our IFAD response. So we have four main areas. One, we will firstly continue to honor our existing commitments The fund will continue to allocate 25% of its program of loans and grants to climate-focused activities. It will also strengthen its efforts to increase the resilience of at least 24 million people by the end of 2021. Additionally, IFAD has reinforced commitment to social inclusion by ensuring that 25% of new projects are gender transformative, 50% are nutrition sensitive, and youth is mainstream in 50%. Then the second element is the rural stimulus facility that Paul has just mentioned. And it's important to remind everyone that although we have our initial amount of $40 million, the facility has to be supplemented with a lot more, and hopefully with 200 million in the near future. We will be working in synergy with the UN Secretary General Response and Recovery Fund, as well as the UN country teams. And member states and other donors are invited to contribute to the facility. We are also repurposing projects because we understand that ongoing projects and projects that are currently under development need to be repurposed to be able to deal with the crisis. So this support will aim to maintain and improve rural livelihoods, in particular by supporting activities related to markets and production services, especially finance, training, and nutrition. And finally, IFAD will also support policy analysis and engagement and partnership building at the country level. Thank you, Paul. Over to you.
Thank you, Margarita. So now we'll move to Sarah, who is IFAD's Regional Director for East and Southern Africa, and will give us an update on how things are in East and Southern Africa. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Paul. Ambassador Wennubst and fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share a story of one resilient farmer in the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic from East and Southern Africa. The story begins with Sharon Kirui's initial situation in 2017 before she began her relationship with the IFAD Finance Project, Kenya's Zero Enhancement Program, commonly known as Kesep Karal. Sharon Kirui, who is on the screen just in front of you, is a 20-year-old wife and mother of 3 children living in Chuminit village, Neswit Ward, Njoro sub-county in Nakuru in Kenya. And this really resonates with what the ambassador's opening statement saying, small-scale farmers are really the fabric of society. Sharon has a 2-acre farm where she used to plant uncertified bean seeds purchased from the local market. She used to basically plant them in the same hole to save time and didn't adhere to any specific space requirements for either crop. As a result, she always faced bad agronomic practices, low fertilizer application, low yields. All of these combined impacts led her to only yield 9 90 kg bags per acre every harvest. So Sharon heard about the Kesep Karal through community mobilization barazas, or village committees, where she learned about the program's objectives, terms, and eligibility criteria. So a little bit more about the Kesep Karal project. So the Kesep Karal project, its main objective is to reduce rural poverty and food insecurity among smallholder farmers in Kenya's arid and semi-arid lands, by developing, on the one hand, their economic potential, while improving their natural resource management capabilities for resilience to climate change in an increasingly fragile ecosystem. The project has 2 main pillars. The first is graduation of smallholder farmers from subsistence to climate resilient, commercially oriented agriculture through targeted investments in productivity, post-harvest management, and access to markets. And the second pillar of the program is capacity building of county governments and communities to sustainably manage their natural resources and build resilience to climate change. The program was launched back in 2015. Sharon applied to be part of the program and was recruited as one of the beneficiaries in 2017 in the second cohort, one among 12,662 other farmers. After recruitment into the e-voucher system and getting a smart card, Sharon, along with other farmers, formed groups of 25 farmers each. The groups were then trained on good agricultural practices that ranged from how to intercrop maize and beans properly in individual lines, fertilizer applications, recommended rate of 2 bags per acre, and including financial literacy, among other things. After the training, Sharon and her group members were issued with seed, fertilizer, post-harvest materials through an e-voucher card. Now, all of these investments supported Sharon to transition from subsistence to commercial farming. How did she do that? Well, she basically observed the good crop management practices throughout the growing period. After harvest, she cleaned the produce, sorted and dried it on tarpaulins, considerably reducing the post-harvest losses she used to experience before. Despite the drought at the beginning of last year and the fall armyworm attack, the program's interventions actually enabled Sharon and her colleagues to substantially increase her production from an average of 9 to 11 bags of maize per acre to 26 bags of 19 kgs per acre. This is over 100% increase, so that's quite powerful. And what did Sharon do with her proceeds? Basically, Sharon has been able to store 6 bags of maize using hematic bags. This has provided her family with enough food until the next harvest season. She then sold 10 bags of maize to pay school fees for her children, which is approximately 15,000 Kenyan shillings, equivalent to $141. She was also able to pay 40% of the e-voucher, which is required by the program to secure inputs for the next season, and that was for roughly about $63, of which she also managed to buy 2 sheep as a form of a saving. And then finally, with the remaining 10 bags, she was able to store this away in a storage warehouse, following the group guidelines to try and secure higher prices for later in the season when she could sell. And all this is very important because as a result of this program, Sharon and other beneficiaries have built resilience to crises such as COVID-19 in 4 important ways. The first is food security, because she now has enough stored up for the next harvest season. The second one is savings. I just told you that she was able to buy 2 sheep. And this is very important to have these types of assets in times of uncertainty. The third important aspect is good agricultural practices. Now that she is retooled and reskilled, she's able to improve productivity in a sustained way in the face of climate change in a very fragile ecosystem. And the very important fourth aspect is that she now has sustained access to input and output markets through the e-voucher program, and also access to markets through collective marketing organized by her group of 25 farmers. This cannot be overlooked, and it's absolutely critical. We see for many smallholder farmers in the situations they face now in the face of COVID-19. It is also to be noted that in the cohort of 2020 this year, the beneficiaries, in spite of the COVID-19 outbreak, have already accessed inputs, mainly certified seeds and fertilizer. But in addition to that, they've also accessed mechanized conservation agriculture services from the e-voucher platform to plant maize beans, sorghum, and green grams. These farmers, agro-dealers, and other value chain actors are complying with the government COVID-19 measures and guidelines for farming in Kenya. This includes social and physical distancing, wearing face masks, washing hands, or using sanitizers. In fact, currently the national government, with support from the World Bank, in collaboration with AGRA, FAO, other partners, are scaling up the e-voucher system to the entire country, demonstrating the program's potential for scale and ability and adaptability as government redefines its agricultural inputs policies from lessons learned from this program. And finally, I would just like to end with one note. As of the 30th of April 2020, as part of IFAD's COVID-19 response, the Eastern Southern Africa Division is repurposing funds, and I think Margarita mentioned that, from 13 projects from across 10 countries for an overall amount of approximately $30 million. Moreover, the division has 7 grants submitted to the Rural Poor Stimulus Facility that we heard earlier, that Paul talked about earlier about, to address the COVID-19 as it spreads across the region. And this is mainly to promote access to digital markets and services for smallholders, to encourage SMEs in rural areas to access finance, to facilitate bridging access to inputs, like what Case of Coral has done in the case of Sharon, and to support government policy responses in re-governing markets, which are no longer the same. We have to face it in the face of the health risks that are there. And we are trying to do this through grant funding for an overall amount of quite a significant envelope of potentially $50 million. And so I just want to say, IFAD's programs over the years in Kenya have impacted a total of about 4.3 million households. And although this is impressive, it's still relatively small. I just want to use this opportunity to call on all stakeholders to really support IFAD's resource mobilization efforts for the rural stimulus facilities. There's so much to be done, and so we can really scale up these sorts of results and build resilience in small farmer home systems. Thank you very much. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Sarah. Now we'll go to Esther Panunia, the Executive Director of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. It has 13 million family farmers as members across 16 countries. So Esther's in a great position to talk to us about this. Esther, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Paul. Hello to everyone. We thank IFAD for inviting us to this webinar as a panelist. Since early March, AFA has been in regular consultation with our members and key partners about COVID-19 impact and response. We are implementing several regional projects, the biggest of which is MTCP2 AFOS and Asia Pacific Farmers Program, supported by IFAD, SDC, and EU. And we have an outreach of 43 million family farmers in 28 countries with 82 national FOs. Now, can we show the slide? You know, in many Asia Pacific countries, it was harvest time when our governments imposed partial or total lockdowns to contain the virus. And here are some examples of the impact of COVID-19 to family farmers. First, an organic vegetable production group in Laos. In Laos, 7 to 8 tons of members produced were left rotten. A woman farmer of Nepal cannot sell her chickens to the market. A woman farmer in Mongolia cannot sell her wool and cashmere at the capital. Without buyers, prices of products were 2 to 3 times less or were left rotten, since many of them do not have adequate cooling and storage facilities. What does all this mean? This means no markets, no buyers, no processing, no storage, means no income for family farmers when they should be earning during harvest time to keep them afloat until the next harvest. And there are millions of family farmers who have situations like this in Asia Pacific, which is home to 70% of the family farmers in the world. And what about those in the cities? Food was scarce and more expensive. And in developing countries, many rely on public transportation, which are unavailable during lockdown. Furthermore, many city people went home to provinces for food security, but this meant increased demand and pressure on already scarce land resources. But family farmers are frontliners too, especially in the work to build the body's resilience and resistance to the COVID through healthy, nutritious, and fresh food, like what SDC said a while ago. What have been the examples of our actions? First, Myanmar FO distributed food packs to about 40 farming families who were locked down because one of them had the virus. India FO made 5 lakhs of facial masks and distributed this for free to farming families. Farmers all over Asia are continuing to farm and produce safe, healthy, and nutritious food. Farmers are also continuing to make kitchen gardens. Here, I would like to show you an FB post of a young farmer. He is the leader of a local farmer org. He went to the town's agriculture center, got some seeds, and then repacked this for distribution to its members for free. And then another young farmer, leader of a cooperative who was a participant to the Global FAFO last February, they are providing service and extension. They are recruiting members for their cooperative and at the same time training them for organic soya production. And lastly, remember the Lao farmer group I mentioned earlier, because their situation got some news or was spread, the local government, a logistics company, and other traders partner with them to bring their products to the market. And lastly, farmers are already doing direct selling to consumers. Here we see 3 women farmers from the indigenous community Dumagats, leaders of our all-women startup primary cooperative called Kagat with 150 members, and they are having threat for their ancestral lands because of the big mega dam construction in their area. So its national FO partnered with the homeowners association to use its covered basketball court for a weekend farmers market. They brought 4 tons of produce and they could not sell it here in the farmers market. So they made a FB post, and in response, several church and NGO groups later brought 600 packs of assorted vegetables for its feeding program for the homeless. And because of that, all their products were sold. And the women leaders were very happy and inspired with the feedback of the consumers that they are now again in this homeowners basketball court for its 2nd week of operations. So primarily, we were talking about the new normal. What we think is the new normal now? Primarily, the COVID-19 pandemic has made citizens realize again the value of farmers producing healthy food, and governments the value of becoming more and more self-reliant in agri-production. It has confirmed our advocacy for shorter and inclusive value and food chains with strong participation of farmers in the governance of these chains, and confirmed our belief that it is with solidarity and cooperation that we can prevent another food and nutrition security crisis. Thus, we call on our governments and development partners to provide direct financing to FOs to upscale our endeavors to first raise awareness on COVID-19 in our communities, to act as local government partners in distribution of emergency food assistance, especially through public procurement, increase agriculture productivity through agroecological and climate resilient approaches in farms, fisheries, and forests, processing and distribution of food through post-harvest and transportation facilities, including access to finance, strengthening capacities in policy and program engagement with local government units, and all these endeavors through an integrated approach of organizing, federating, and capacity building of women, men, and young farmers through their FOs and cooperatives, plus in partnership with the key stakeholders such as government, development partners, and CSOs. We are very happy to hear about IFAD's Rural Poor Stimulus Facility. We have submitted a project proposal called Arise Family Farmers. It's a result of bottoms-up consultation process among our partners in Asia Pacific. And we hope that this can be generously supported by IFAD. As now we are in the harvesting and slowly going to the planting season, and we need the support now. Now is the time for this kind of support. So we hope also other development partners can provide support. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Esther. A very strong message about no markets, no processing, no storage, no income. So it comes through very clear. Now we'll turn over to Rosanna, our Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. Rosanna, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you and have the opportunity to showcase what we are doing in resilience in the LAC region. I would like to start by providing a few stylized facts. I'm sorry, I don't see my, okay, thank you. I would like to start shortly by providing you with a few stylized facts about the Latin American region. The region counts with 620 million people, of which 120 live in rural areas. It's around 80% of the population. Despite consistent economic growth up to 2019, inequality remains a huge issue. In fact, the LAC region is the most unequal region in the world. Rural poverty is unacceptably high, and it's more prevalent among women and indigenous groups as they face discriminations in terms of access to assets such as land, as well as education and other opportunities. In terms of COVID-19, LAC will face a major setback as the COVID-19 pandemic slams the global economy. The reality is that we can expect a mega social economic shock. So far, governments have responded, enforcing social isolation and mobility restrictions, while at the same time launching some measures to contain the impact on the economy. Even some governments in the region have provided cash transfers for the poor, a measure that cannot be sustained for long as fiscal spaces are limited for the most. What do we know now? Some think tanks, IMF, ECLAC, are estimating that the current pandemic will lead to the biggest contraction in economic activity in LAC's history. The region expects a drop of 5.3% in GDP for 2020. This implies that in LAC we will have more than 30 million people poor only in 2020. Where is IFAD now? We have a presence in 17 countries. Through our 32 projects, we are reaching over 3 million direct beneficiaries. And IFAD has a long history of strong local partnership, as well as strong reputation with other financiers. If you look at our co-financing ratio, it's above 1.6 ratio, and governments are seeking IFAD's partnership to build resilience while ensuring that small farmers have the adequate means for generating enough income to step out of poverty. What has been our approach after COVID-19? We decided to follow what we call the 3Rs approach to continue supporting our countries: recovery, reactivation, and resilience. Our initial efforts have focused on recovery phase. We are getting ready to step in when conditions allow us. We have identified activities in our projects under implementation that are ready and can quickly allow small-scale farmers and small rural enterprises to be back into business. Some of them are repurposing, as Margarita mentioned, but others are activities that were already planned, but because of the restrictions and isolation, we cannot proceed with them. In coming months, the rural economy will have a predominant role in the recovery phase, particularly agriculture and fishery sectors in the LAC region. In the medium term, IFAD's program will align interventions with government reactivation plans for the rural sector and will continue building agricultural resilience. All project designs will focus on bringing farmers and rural households back into business as speedily as possible, while ensuring that inclusiveness and resilience are built into an innovative vision of sustainable rural transformation. Resilience is much more relevant nowadays. Resilience, by definition, is the capacity to recover rapidly from shocks or difficulties. In fact, in many of our projects already, we have been focusing on equipping farmers to absorb and recover from shocks and stresses to their agricultural production and livelihoods. We have already have evidence that this increase in poverty of 30 more million poor in the LAC region, we have been able to our programs to shield some of our beneficiaries from this mega shock. So it has been a good investment working with the LAC region. Since I have a few minutes to describe what we have been doing, I look at my program and what stands out of my program. What is the common thread in all of our projects? And the common thread is the building resilience to nature-based solutions. Investing in resilience is smart. Investing in green infrastructure is even smarter. We are already working on climate smart agriculture to improve resilience as well as productivity in the member countries. The benefits and importance of this is clear for our beneficiaries as well as for governments. Resilience in our projects have a strong focus towards nature-based solutions, which are at the center of the rural public policy. What are not nature-based solutions? They are investment in green infrastructure and productive systems that maximize the benefits of natural capital for the well-being of the local population and the ecosystem. This is particularly relevant for smallholders as investments are in general, and this type of investments are generally much more cost efficient, adapted to the local context, and incorporate traditional knowledge and values. The COVID-19 shock has further increased the rationale to strengthen resilience in smallholder farming systems. In all cases, incorporation of local knowledge is essential by ensuring people that live and have the stake in a specific ecosystems are heard and empowered. IFAD brings together science and traditional knowledge to develop evidence-based approaches that put building resilience of small farmers as a priority in our projects. What are we currently doing and how we are promoting nature-based solutions in our projects? Here I have 3 examples of how we work in building resilience to nature-based solutions. The first one is planting resilience, a project in Brazil, which is entirely green investment project. This is a case of directly funding investments on ecosystem-based solutions and natural infrastructure. It is simple and cost-efficient and brings huge potential benefits to small farmers in the semi-arid northeastern Brazil region. The project under preparation seeks to increase production while simultaneously improving farmers' capacity to face the challenges posed by ongoing climate change and result in resilient and productive farming systems, performing restored ecosystems. The second one is Accesos in Bolivia. It's a resilient value chain project. This is not a plain vanilla project. This is our poster child for participatory planning that focuses on building resilience through nature-based solutions. The project has promoted participatory planning for ecosystem-based solutions, incorporating indigenous and traditional knowledge. The project increased ownership, recognizing and addressing the trade-offs between the production of a few intermediate economic benefits and long-term benefits of ecosystem services, resulting in a much more informed and better investment with higher potentials of adapting and mitigating shocks. The third type of project is Merece, an innovative financial instrument. With the government of Peru, we are developing a socially and financially sustainable payment for ecosystem services mechanism. Following a watershed management approach, the project promotes a fairer distribution between downstream beneficiaries that can pay for the services received from upstream communities, ensuring that both the sustainable use and conservation of natural resources, as well as the long-term maintenance of natural services. IFAD, as a conclusion, for me, IFAD has the capacity to fund and promote harnessing of natural capital in LAC and build resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna. We have about 10 minutes, 12 minutes for questions. And I'm going to ask the first question to both Margarita and to Esther. So if you could give us short answers. So the first question is, we've heard a lot about resilience and the discussion, the need to build resilience. So what does resilience building mean to you? So what does it mean, and how can building resilience help fight this pandemic and future issues like that? So Margarita first, and then Esther, and as I asked, please quick answers. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. I think that Rosanna clearly defined it. Really is to help our small-scale producers to be able to react faster and cope with this pandemic and other crises. So that is our job, basically, to ensure that they are able to cope with the crisis and be hopefully better off than they are right now after we finish our investments. Over.
Esther, please.
Yes, I think we will have to ensure food and nutrition during any pandemic, and it's the family farmers who produce food. So they must build a resilience to produce food, as well as to be able to bring the food to the people. Food that is healthy, nutritious, and fresh, because that helps build resistance of the body and the immunity of the body to illnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Let me ask this question that's just come up to Rosanna and Sarah, if you can again be brief. So the question is, will IFAD help build food systems that are more resilient to this type of crisis, in particular regarding access to markets for rural population? So will we help build these food systems that are more resilient, so a broader food system resilience, and particularly regarding access to markets for rural population? Sarah, do you want to start, please?
Yes, thank you, Paul. I think it's all about food systems. And I think Esther's presentation was very clear on how smallholder farmers connecting to logistic providers, transporters, and others, and then moving up further in the value chain can actually be part of the solution. There's also very interesting opportunities that are emerging where SMEs are saying, can we move markets to rural communities as well? So we're really looking at interesting ways of leveraging ICT and finance just to empower and make investments where there has been gaps. And I think this is what the Rural Poor Stimulus Facility is all about. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Rosanna.
Yes. Of course, in the short run, we are working with our beneficiaries in ensuring that they can, the buyers and sellers can connect. In particularly for the food systems, we are facing in LAC a major challenge, as many of our beneficiaries were part of the school feeding programs, and now that the kids are at home, we have been working with governments in ensuring that procurement processes can go fast, and we can ensure that both children at home receive the food, as well as farmers can sell their products without having issues. We already been working with some of the food banks to make sure that the excess supply is stored properly. But these are all short-run issues. We know that business as usual cannot continue. We need to understand what will be the impact of COVID-19 in our beneficiaries and how their profile will change after this. So we are working both in the short term and the long term.
Thanks, Rosanna. Let me go back to Margarita. Another question. How will IFAD ensure remote women farmers have access to quality information, reliable information, and adequate support?
Thank you, Paul. I think that one of the key elements that we are doing, or one of the key areas of priority right now for us, is to ensure that all our projects that are going to be funded through the facility will do proper targeting, and that we will, through that targeting, identify what are the needs of the women where we are going to be working with. So we would work on including provision of seeds, training, access to finance, and as Sarah mentioned, something very, very important at this time is ICT-based agricultural solutions. So right now, what we need to first identify the needs in the different places, and then design those projects and those investments based on those needs to cover those needs. Over to you.
Thanks. You guys are doing great answering questions quickly. Keep it up. Esther, one that I think would be good for you. How much does securing tenure to farmers contribute to reduce the crisis of the impact? So how important is securing land tenure, ownership rights, important to reduce the crisis impact?
Yes, it is very important. It is very basic. We cannot produce food if we don't have lands, if we cannot have access to forests and to our municipal waters. Natural resources is very important. So security of tenure is very important. If we don't have that, if we are like tenants or sharecroppers, we will the division of the division in the incomes for any marketing will be very small for us.
Thank you.
So that's very basic.
Yes, and very important, as you just said. Sarah, let me ask you, there's a question about net food importing developing countries, which a number of countries in East and Southern Africa are. How do we help these net food importing developing countries? And would it be possible to use technology to assist in food production?
And thank you for the question, Paul. I think this is one of the fundamental challenges that we face. Fragmented markets in many countries across East and Southern Africa has been a huge problem. The very fact that, transaction costs that smallholder farmers face to take their stock to market, the fact that they don't have adequate facilities for storing their food, the fact that they don't have basically negotiating power over prices has really meant that they don't get their produce at the fair price really to urban consumers. And what you then find is that there are systems in place that it's easier to just import food for half the cost. And what are the types of investments and the policy changes that need to be made at national level to really encourage investment in those rural spaces and in rural communities to enable them to produce adequately? And I think part of that is the mechanization you're talking about. Very interestingly now, with the COVID-19 challenge, we're seeing innovative ways of leveraging the private sector to step in and fill some of those gaps. So in the case of, for instance, Rwanda, where they're leveraging mechanization services to ensure that where there's labor gaps, farming can still continue. Another example is the introduction of irrigation services. Gone are the days where you need big schemes. You can have actually irrigation service providers in the rural space providing needed essential water and reducing dependency on rain-fed agriculture, and young people are providing those services. Similarly, again, services linking to agricultural inputs. All of those are the types of investments that are needed in order to boost and sustain production. Another very important and last element is markets and information about that. And now we see with the spread of the internet, mobile telephony, all these interesting technologies, you get rural communities able to communicate and access information. And we see natural linkages happening with retail chains in urban centers, linking up directly to smallholder producers, enabling that negotiation offline. The introduction of nano platforms also allows for digital transactions that don't require the internet. So all of these financial interactions that could use and leverage technologies that come in are really providing us with just enormous opportunities. And finally, I just want to say that we can actually harness the phone to actually do e-extension. And this is what is being promoted now in several countries to make that necessary gap between information, skill sets that can make a difference. Over to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. A question for you, Rosanna, which is related just to what Sarah was talking about. In a time when global trade has been partially interrupted, what is the role and potential of small local farmers, and how can IFAD help them explore this potential? So is there a different role now that we see that, that global trade is disrupted?
Yes, in fact, as I mentioned in my presentation, there's an important role for small farmers, and I think that they will have they will be part of the solution for the situation we are facing now that we have restrictions in terms of trade. And what is IFAD's role? IFAD's role is facilitating the insertion of the small farmers into the markets. We are working with some technologies, as the ones that Sarah just mentioned, through ICT for Development, trying to put together buyers and sellers through apps. But the fact that internet is not widespread in some of the countries, access to the nanotechnologies that Sarah mentioned is a channel that we should start exploring. We are also working with several governments in terms of using some of their programs in terms of one laptop per child to also access those laptops with parents at home to make sure that they also can have an information in terms of where they can sell their products.
Thanks. So I think we're getting short on time, so I'll give one last question to Margarita, and then I'll give you each 30, 45 seconds to give your closing remarks. So for Margarita, one of the questions that's come in is how can IFAD help tackle the increased youth unemployment during and after the pandemic? We already know that youth struggle in entering the market and being in agricultural production. So what can IFAD do to help tackle this increase that's occurring right now?
Thank you, Paul. For us, of course, as I was saying earlier, for the same as gender, we need to apply very carefully our targeting strategy. We need to identify the youth in the areas and their needs and ensure that we are helping them achieve their potential. So we have already in the Youth Action Plan some very concrete proposals on how to achieve this. And now we are in the process also of making sure that they engage better with us at the country level to really design projects that would help them either develop a business or start a small trade company, whatever it is that is adequate for these youth on the ground. So basically seeing clearly what their needs are and how we can support them through our investments. Over.
Okay. Thanks. So now, thanks for answering all the questions, especially in such a concise manner. We got through it more than I expected. Now let's go through and give your final comments. So let's start with Sarah, then Esther, Rosanna, Margarita, and then we'll give our guest Pio the final word. So let's start with you, Sarah, please.
Thank you, Paul. I think my takeaway from this interesting discussion is the fact that food systems are very connected. I talked about how Sharon is buying beans and seeds from local markets. And so producers are also consumers. And I think this dichotomy is something, and it's very important to note. I also think when we talk about production systems, the aspect of sustainability, the aspect of climate and building resilience will be key going forward as communities face multiple shocks. So smallholder family farmers are key in any society across the world. I think this has become very clear in the face of COVID-19. The case for investment is very clear. They're not only contributors to food production, but they also really reproduce and safeguard our biodiversity on one level. And then they're also custodians of various other things, including the environment. So my closing statement here is to say, when we mobilize investment in the rural space, we actually yield a fourfold return. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Esther, please.
Yes, thank you, Paul. We think that building resilience in a pandemic or post-COVID or even during COVID is basically empowering the smallholder family farmers so that they can produce healthy, fresh food, nutritious food, and then they can bring their products to the market in using shorter value chains or shorter food chains. And empowering means building the capacities to also do value addition, to do direct marketing to consumers. So we say that family farmers are frontliners, and they are IFAD's key partners also in really ensuring food and nutrition security and in ensuring that there will be maintenance of livelihoods, and even getting the youth to be part of all this rural economy of producing nutritious food through agroecological approaches and marketing them, processing them, doing value addition, and processing them through their organizations and cooperatives. Farmers organizations will also be in any project, will also be your very best exit sustainability strategy. So please empower them and provide direct financing assistance to the efforts of family farming organizations for their members. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Rosanna.
Thank Thank you. I would like to leave the event with two important messages. First, the first one is that building on resilience has been a smart and efficient investment in the LAC region. And as I said, we have been shielding our beneficiaries from this mega shock. In the short run, COVID has brought a major disruption, and we need to help overcome these disruptions as the new challenges, as the flow of goods in the economy will not be as usual. And the second message is we need to understand the channels of transmission of this mega shock into our beneficiaries to better tailor our projects in the future.
Thank you. Very good, Rosanna. Margarita, please.
Thank you, Paul. Well, I think the crisis offers us the chance to build back better and to recalibrate development so that in future is resilient and inclusive and takes into account all social and environmental issues so that we can really build the best resilience we can for future to be able to cope with future crises. And in my view, and I think in IFAD's view in general, we know that only a holistic process, an integrated process that empowers all smallholders, young, old, women, everybody can achieve this, is the only way we can achieve this better future for all. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Margarita. Pio, please.
Thank you. So Esther put it clearly, the challenge, the disruption of system, leading on the one hand, income disappearing for farmer producers, on the other hand, in towns, the cost of food goes up, which is a disruption of a system. The solution that Esther is proposing is shorten the food chains. Shorten the food chains is not as easy as saying it. It comes with a lot of implications. So the answer given by Margarita, Sarah, and Rosanna are bringing partially some of the solutions to this challenge, which is ideally will be solved by almost individualizing, making very shorter food system. Now, what food chains? What is important to take on board is, as Margarita said at the end, you need a systemic approach. Even though we don't like this term because it means everything and nothing, but actually this is the point. The lesson from the COVID, what we are learning now and what we should have learned already in crisis 2008, is that it's not just about production, the linkage, the direct linkage between production and consumption, about all the system. And the system, and there are the signal how the system can be built in the future. There is already good options there. They are being described today, at least some of them. It's important to consider the nutrition part of the food has been taken on board at the end. This is the link to the determinants of health. We cannot escape that. This is going to become massively important in the future. So we have simply to build in also these elements into our intervention. And the least we can, as external actors, intervene, but just support the initiatives of who is directly involved, the better it is, with good example. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you,
Pio. Very well said. So I have nothing to add. I think you've all done a great job of wrapping up. And what's clear is that we do have issues with the food system, and this is showing those issues more clearly. And so we need to take this as an opportunity, not just to resolve the short-term issues, but to figure out how we address these longer-term issues that are much more structural in nature. So with that, let me thank our panelists, Margarita, Sarah, and Rosanna from IFAD, and then Esther, we greatly appreciate you joining us from the Philippines. We haven't forgotten your proposal. We will get back to you. And then thank you, Pio, for joining both the opening remarks and your final statements there. Thanks to the audience and then the technical staff that, of course, helped us. And finally, let me just let you know that the details of the new IFAD facility are on the website, so you can go and check that, and also news from our global operations. And then you can join us for the next event in the series, which will be at 3 p.m. Rome time on Thursday, the 28th of May. And that information on that will be sent out soon. So thank you very much, and we'll stop there. Have a good afternoon and good evening to Esther. Bye-bye.